Do you feel under-equipped to engage Muslims with the gospel, but you find yourself with a desire to share with those in your community, whether that's classmates or coworkers? Then I have a book for you that will help you navigate gospel conversations with Muslims. This is Good Sources, where we introduce you to sources for personal growth and use in discipleship as you grow as a disciple, becoming a discipler of others. The book I want to introduce you today is Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. This book is written by Nabeel Quereshi, who was a convert from Islam to Christianity. Since then, Nabeel has passed away from cancer and is in the presence of the Lord. And Nabeel wrote this autobiography telling his story about how, as a Muslim, he sought to know God, he sought to know truth, he sought to live for righteous things, and through that pursuit of those things, he was introduced to Christianity through a friend and through different cultural scenarios. It just kind of happened living in the Western world, and through that, he was seeking Allah, and in seeking Allah, what he came to was the truth of the New Testament, that Jesus wasn't just a prophet, but that he was the Son of God, he was the Lord of Lords, and that he really did die on the cross, and he was raised from the grave, and he ascended into heaven. And I think that this is such a great resource for anyone that is interested in learning about Islam. Not only is this a biography, it is a biography, right? It's about his life, it's his story, but this book is really well put together in a way that allows readers to be introduced to Islam as a whole. And so it's not just an introduction to Nabeel's life, but throughout the book there's definitions, there's pictures being painted of what Muslims believe. He's laying out the Islamic faith. What do Muslims believe in a very simple way, which is why I think this is such a good book for Christians to pick up. You should pick this book up because it introduces you to the basics of Islam through the lens of an individual story. Now, there's another reason why I like this book. Yes, it's really helpful if you're wanting to be introduced to Islam, and there are other books out there that do a really good job of introducing us to the basics of the Islamic faith. But this one is such an easily accessible one, and I think that you should pick it up if you have any desire whatsoever to engage Muslims in your community. But one of the other reasons I like this book is because really it's a story of friendship. Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus is about how Nabeel ultimately interacts with a friend who's willing to have discourse, who's willing to have hard conversations about Jesus, about what Muslims believe and about what Christians believe, to go deep into these things for the sake of not only gospel conversations, but for the sake of seeing this individual come to Christ. Now, David Wood is the friend that's mentioned throughout this book, and David is an apologist today. You can find him on YouTube. Would recommend you check out any of his work. And one of the things that's so fascinating in this book is how David is just persistent in his life, and not just persistent in like, hey, I love you, you stay there, but he's active in calling Nabeel to repent and believe. I think there's so much that can be learned from this, that as Christians, we should seek to have conversations and real relationships with non-Christians for the sake of seeing them repent and believe in Jesus Christ as Lord. Our desire in relationships should be for that. Now, that doesn't mean that your closest relationships are with non-Christians, but it does mean that we are intentional or proactive in seeking out real relationships with the lost in our community. Now, if you want to have real relationships with Muslims in your community, I encourage you to pick this book up. I use this book personally. The first time I read this, just kind of read it on my own. I've used this in discipleship with those that are wanting to engage Muslims because it's such an easy entry into the conversation about what Muslims believe. And he does many things by pointing out connection points that are helpful when engaging Muslims with the gospel. And so I think that's helpful. And note that Muslims believe Jesus is a prophet, and he points that out and how that can spur on a good conversation. I also think that this book is great for evangelism. If you have a Muslim friend who's willing to sit down and work through a book with you, I think you should try to take them through this book and see if they'd be willing to navigate the story of someone who left Islam for Christianity. Now, this can be somewhat of a contentious topic, right? When we're talking about having people leave one faith for the other, and our culture sees that as almost evil. And I think the thing that we have to remember when it comes to longing to see the lost come to Christ, those who are far from Christ, to come to him, we have to remember that the truth is not how one feels or how we're even perceived, but the truth is in the reality that the gospel is true. And if the gospel is true, our Muslim neighbor, our Muslim friend, our Muslim coworker is going to spend an eternity being judged by a wrathful God who hates sin. And so we should long to see the Muslims in our community come to know Christ. And so I encourage you, pick up a copy of Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, if you desire to engage Muslims in your community more with the gospel of Christ. For more resources, visit emmettministries.org and make sure you follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and subscribe on YouTube for more weekly content from Emmett Ministries.